Hey friends, so I am a quilt pattern designer, and so often, a lot of the time, I get stuck on the quilting and binding portion of finishing a quilt. I make a lot of quilt tops, and sometimes they don't make it to a full quilt. Eventually, I think they all do, give or take. But I am embarking on the next 2 weeks on finishing as many quilt tops as I possibly can and taking you along for the ride. I am going to be sharing on Instagram and here on YouTube as I try different threads, different battings, and different long arm free motion quilting techniques on my Grace Company machine. I quilt on a Grace Company Q-Unique 21 Elite. I'm a Grace Company ambassador, and I also quilt on the 8-foot long Quilter's Evolution frame. And I'm very excited about this machine. I've been using it now for about 4 to 5 months, and it's been awesome. I've had a Grace Company machine for 4 years now, but I've just become an ambassador last year. And the difference between my old machine and this machine is just that it is larger. So it's a deeper throat space, which is the back area, this open area, and is what determines how far it can move forward, which for me allows me to quilt a larger area. And I upgraded my frame. Grace Company gave me a discount to purchase a better frame for myself. Just a few more bells and whistles than my old frame, which I also really loved. It was the Q Zone Queen frame, and it worked great for the first 4 years. My initial machine that I started with was a Q-Unique 15R, which they no longer make, but they have a 16, and that's their base model long arm machine. So it's been really fun to quilt on this, and I'm excited to try out a couple new threads. Grace actually sent me their Finesse Thread that is gonna be fun to try, as well as lots of different colors, which is a little bit outside my comfort zone, but we're gonna have some fun and play with the colors. I have been using glide thread on my old Grace machine as well as this one, and I'm having some tension issues, so that is why I wanted to branch out and try some new threads, as well as the Finesse. I'm going to try Omni Threads by Superior Threads. This was recommended to me multiple times on Instagram, and several friends who have Grace machines, the actual similar setup to my old setup, use not Superior Threads, this is Superior Threads, Connecting Threads. And this is their Essential Pro thread, and they love it. So we're gonna try all 4 of these different types of threads and see if any of them fit well with me and my machine, or if I'm gonna stick with glide. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. I have so far 10 quilt tops, and I think I have a few more hiding in a cabinet, and I'm gonna try and pull those out. So my goal, I'm thinking, is 2 a day would get me 10 done in 1 week. I think that's probably a little bit like high reaching. We'll find out. I'm gonna start with the first one that is a sparked quilt, and it's a baby size, so that's a pretty easy. From there, I do have 2 squirrel quilts, which is my own pattern, as well as a sparked quilt. I have this firefly quilt. Can't remember if that's the exact name. It's by Pen and Paper Patterns though. And I have this starfy quilt, which is also my own pattern. Those all have backings ready to go. This pile over here, I have Starbeam at the bottom. The next is Star Petals. The next in the middle here is the New Star Beginner quilt that also has a free course that goes with it. I have another Starfy, and then the Trip Around the World quilt I did on my last retreat. The first 4 in this row are my own patterns. None of these 5 have backings, so I'm probably gonna have to make a trip to a local quilt shop or do some looking online. I'm gonna go through my backing stash and see if I have anything and find any more quilt tops that might be hiding around. So I am currently waiting for my batting roll because I have 1 quilt's worth left, and probably a small quilt from my last batting roll. But I have a whole cart of scraps that I'm going to do some Franken batting for some of the smaller quilts. And I did buy, in case my batting roll doesn't come in time, I did buy Hobbs cotton batting in a queen size that I can get one quilt out of. I had a little issue with, I ordered a roll of batting from a shop at the beginning of January. Last week it got canceled, and then I reordered from Michael's and it has shipped. It should be here today, so fingers crossed everything works out with that. I'm very excited about this because I want to get all of these done and quilted, and then after this 2 weeks, maybe before it's over, I'm probably not, I'm gonna go into a binding challenge, and that'll probably only be a week long because I'll just have to cut and bind a bunch of quilts, and I'm not going to finish binding them, but I'm gonna get the binding prepped and sewn on so I can then hand bind as I have time. I love having a quilt to hand bind. I think you can see these baskets over here are a basket full of hand quilting quilts that I'm working on, and then a basket of binding quilts that need to be hand bound, and that one only has one left and it's like half done. So on that note, I have a giant pile back here. Can we see this? With quilts that are quilted that need to be trimmed and have the binding added to them. So my binding challenge is going to be intensive because I might have 15 to 20 quilts that need to be bound. But it's going to be fun, and it's a way for me to continue moving and being creative while I'm not feeling the most like inspired. I'm feeling kind of in a rut where I don't want to design any new patterns right now. I don't want to make anything new. So I've just been working on, in January, completing projects that are already underway. I'm really excited for this challenge. I hope you are too. I'm gonna try to do a YouTube video twice a week for this challenge so you can see my progress, and so I can share some tips on how I based a quilt onto my long arm, as well as different free motion quilting techniques that I do and want to learn on my long arm. And then I will be able to kind of give you time, like live almost, not really live because YouTube's not live, updates on what threads I'm liking at the moment. But at the end, the last video, I'll do a recap and we'll see how much I actually got done. So I hope you will enjoy this challenge with me for the next 2 weeks. I'm gonna try to do daily updates on Instagram, so if you are between YouTube videos and like, I really wanna know what she's working on, pop over there and see what I'm doing. And then I will take you through, in this video, I think I'm gonna get the small baby quilt basted on, and I'll take you along for that ride because it's kind of fun to get started right away. I do have to walk all the way around to turn on my long arm because it takes a few minutes to warm up. And in the meantime, we are going to get the backing put on to the long arm. I have a magnetic bowl with all my pins. For this smaller backing, I'm gonna pin it to the long arm rods to my leaders to show you that. And then later, maybe in this video or maybe in a different video, I'm gonna walk you through how I also machine based a backing onto the leaders. Okay, so this is the baby sparked, oh, that scared me a little bit. This is the baby sparked blanket, and the sparked pattern is a fun pattern that I have. This is a baby set size, and I believe it's a roughly 3 by 4 feet. It's not exact, I don't think. And I'm actually using this vintage sheet for the back of it. I think the colors will work nicely. So I just have to see which side goes where. Okay, so when you're basting a quilt onto your long arm, you may know this, but you want it to be several inches wider and longer. I don't know if this is not hugely big. So I'm gonna have to be extra careful and make sure that the length is decent. Okay, I've got plenty of extra room for the length. When you're sending to a long armor, they typically like an extra 4 inches on each side, which I do like as well, but I don't always give myself that much space. And what I like to do is fold in half on the short ends and mark that with a pin on both sides. I'm trying to determine if this fabric has a direction. I think it does, but I think it also doesn't have to be honest. So I have the middle marked, and then direction-wise, I think that's gonna be good. So we want the right side of the backing to be facing the floor and the wrong side of the backing to be facing up or facing me. On my leaders, I have a middle marked on each one as I align the edge of my fabric with the edge of the leader, and I pin along this dotted line that is pre-printed on the leader. I have seen where some people align their fabric with that line, and I've tried that, and it doesn't feel intuitive or natural to me, so I do not do that. So I'm just gonna pin to the end and then pin the other way, and then we'll pop down to the bottom together and start that one too. Okay, I have the top of the backing attached to the top leader, and I just need to just ratchet that up. I'll ratchet it more potentially after I get the bottom on. The bottom I'm doing actually the exact same way, and I am going to align the edge of my backing with the edge of my leader, making sure that my pin, which is the middle of my backing, is in the same spot as my little middle mark for my leader. And those don't necessarily have to be in the middle of your long arm. Close to the middle is fine, as long as they line up to each other. That's really more what they're for, is to make sure that the middle of my backing there is the middle of my backing here, and it's aligned. So I'm just gonna do the same thing. I am putting pins every so often. There's a pin, there's a pin. There's maybe 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch in between the top of the pin and the bottom of the pin, next pin. And I'm gonna finish basting this, and then we will get the rest set up. Okay, I have both of my sides pinned on, and I want this now to be taut. So I'm going to roll up the bottom, and I just want to make sure as I'm rolling that things stay even. It's pretty easy to do with a baby quilt, which is why I started with this, to help show you guys. But just smoothing it out if needed as you go, making sure even the leaders stay straight. Sometimes they like to not. Now, because I am so close to this backing being the same size as the top for width, there is something you could do. But let me do this first. Since I got it tight, I want to put my little ratchet down here too. That just helps me be able to like roll a little bit more, so this is really nice and taut. I like to smooth it out, make sure there's no like big chunky threads that will show through. And I need to put my batting on next. I need to franken batting or look through my small scraps and see if I can find something. But what I was saying about the leaders, which is basically what these are, you could do that same thing on the side of your backing if it isn't wide enough or long enough. You could just sew on with a 1/4 inch seam, just a strip of fabric to give you a little extra width, because that will help with our clip on the side that we want to clip on to keep it taut. So that's what I'm gonna have to play with without doing that, is having those clips. I might have to adjust them or move them while I'm quilting in that space, because they are going to go into my quilt top. So I need to find a piece of batting large enough for this quilt top. I'm just trying to double check which way it goes, and I think this is the top. So let's go through our batting scraps. I keep any batting scraps that I have, and if they're really small, I like to use them for pouches. I also have interfacing scraps here, but sometimes, like, see, this is pretty small, so I would use that for pouches more. But sometimes I get ones that are a little bit larger, and even if it's not big enough for this quilt, I can probably sew it together with another piece and use it that way. My biggest concern with using outside batting is making sure they're the same thickness. These two look and feel the same. Most of the time I buy a bolt and use just that bolt, but sometimes when I'm franken batting, I have leftovers from other bolts, or if I bought prepackaged. So I just want to make sure the same thickness. So I think I found two pieces that I can franken batting together. And I'm going to take you over to the cutting table. We've got lots of hairs and strings, and I'll show you how I do the franken batting from the cutting table in my sewing machine. Okay, I have my two smaller pieces of batting laid out here, and they are overlapped a couple inches. And what I'm basically going to do is use my scissors and cut kind of a curvy line through, and I'm going to go to my machine and do a zigzag for that curvy line to attach them. It doesn't have to be anything scientific, and I've actually done this where I have done straight lines as well, which is easier, but the curvy line is definitely better so that there's just more surface area that's sewn together, and I can see the indentation of the underneath, and I'm making sure to stay away from that so I get a nice matching curve on each batting piece. I'm going to pull out the one underneath. This is the one from the top, and you can see some people will do this on the long arm without zigzagging it together, and then, but I don't do dense enough quilting for that. Okay, I've brought my two pieces over here, and I've just kind of kept an eye on where they need to go together. Luckily this, because I started from the edge, they basically butt right up on the edge, and I'm using a clear foot here so you can see a little bit better. So I'm really just going to do my zigzag, trying to keep that crease of the cut in the middle as centered as possible. See if we can see from a slightly different vantage point a little bit better. Does feel like I'm getting a little bit off, so let's hope I'm not, but it kind of feels like I do. I am. It can never hurt to go back through and just see if there's any spots that you really need to just go over again. Okay, looks pretty good. We might have a little bit of waviness, but we'll smooth it out in quilting. But you can see here just the zigzag together. So I'm gonna pop this off here and lay this on. And because my top edge is not the smoothest, I'm gonna just make sure that the top edge goes higher than my backing. And I do have some bubbles here on part of this, but I'm hoping I can smooth that out in quilting. This is much wider, so I might end up trimming off a little bit. And I still want it to be a few inches wider, just to ease my mind a little bit. But trimming off that bit will make it easier to work with overall. And I don't have to trim off the whole thing, but just trim down a little bit, and then as I quilt, get up to that point, I can trim more. So I do want to baste my batting in place. I'm pushing the back of the foot against the bar just to make sure it's nice and straight, and I'm making sure by my finger going in front that I'm not basting on top of the leader and I'm far enough away from that. So now is a great time just to make sure you don't have any large pieces of thread in the way. A lint roller can come in handy at this point. And we're gonna put the quilt top on. And I like to just align the quilt top with that line from basting on the batting, so it is nice and straight. And then we're gonna do another line of basting for the top of the quilt. The reason I want to make sure this one is so straight at the top is because I don't have a lot of backing, and I want to check that we're okay on the edges. And then I'm just gonna sew about 1/8 of an inch away from the top edge of the quilt to baste on the quilt top. I'll make sure I catch it. Okay, so that quilt top is basted on. I am going to try out some different thread and have to figure out exactly how I am going to quilt this quilt top. I would love to do something maybe centered in the middle of each square with more of an all over type print around. Stars or hearts in the middle of each one, and then with kind of like loopy meandering vibes around. So I'm gonna get the thread changed out and then process that and figure out what I'm doing. Okay, let's see if I can remember how to wind a bobbin. Otherwise I'll have to read the instructions. The one difference I've noticed already between the glide and the finesse is that the Finesse is more cotton, and it's probably all cotton. That was so fast. How did it go so fast, guys? Wow. And the glide is like shiny. I think it's more polyester. So look at that. Wow. I'm going to load up the Finesse into the machine as well as the bobbin. Huh. Okay, I did just check the label, and the Finesse is actually polyester as well, but it looks like cotton. So I'm really interested to see how this works and what it looks like, because I use cotton thread almost exclusively on my domestic machine, so I only have one of the big. So we all know we're supposed to pull thread through, how it goes into the machine. So I'm gonna do that, but first I am going to tie my other thread to it and see if that helps. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Might not be long enough here, but sometimes the little knot gets caught up. But if it even gets through a few of the things, it's helpful. So I realized later that I had to adjust the tension when I was winding my bobbin, because I think that it did not wind it tight enough, and it was like soft to the touch, the bobbin. And it did sew okay, but I did have some tension issues in the back. So I just wanted to mention that here, since we're threading the machine and since I just did the bobbin, that it should not have been that fast. And if it goes fast, check how squishy the bobbin is. And if it feels squishy to the touch, rewind the bobbin tighter by adjusting the thread tension, which is that part that sticks up towards the back of the machine on the top. Okay, so we're ready to go. It's all threaded. I probably should do a test, but I'm just gonna go for it. So I think what I decided to do is a flower in the middle of each, and then I'll just kind of do meandering loops around. So I'm actually gonna start with meandering loops because we're gonna start on the edge. What I do to start is I do the same needle up or needle down, needle up to pull my bobbin thread to the top, and then I'm put my machine back needle down in the needle down position. I have these clips that hold everything in place, and I have those situated. And then these are clamps that I'm gonna put here to hold it taut as I'm sewing, and I can do a quick ratchet to make sure everything is just nice and smooth, and then I can get going quilting. You can kind of see the flower in the middle, and then all the kind of just loopies around. A little bit outside my comfort zone, but I think it's cute and fun, and it's neat to try something different for a baby quilt. Okay, we are all done with the quilting. And now we get to take the quilt off the frame, which is not hard. We can pull this one down and do the same up here. Quilt top number 1 is quilted. Okay, let me walk you through this free motion quilting technique. I am making kind of rainbows that nest together. So I have an upright rainbow and then an upside down rainbow section as you go across each row of the 6-inch squares. So you can kind of see the dividing line for each square, and as I go through each square I am doing this curvy line that in the middle of each dividing line kind of crosses over there, and then I add the rainbow in to each section later. So I'm doing this long curvy line through each row of the bigger squares. It gets a little bit different as you go into the squirrel tail or the squirrel head, and we've got the smaller sections of squares, but we're still staying within that larger squares across the whole quilt. Okay, so to do the rainbow sections in between the curvy lines, you have to have 2 curvy lines in place. So my curvy line was in this top row across, and now I'm adding it in the second row underneath. And it's basically an exact parallel of the curvy line above it. So you want to do 2 curvy lines at a time, and then you can come from the side, and we're going to move over here in a touch so you can see me start from the side. So now that we're over at the side and we have our 2 parallel curving lines that go across the whole quilt, they're spaced roughly 1 row apart. So for this squirrel quilt, it's about 6 inches. And you can kind of see my fingers here as I'm following the curvy line. So then when you're on one side, you can start adding the rainbows in. We're going to use the seams as our guide when we have to go right to left
Because a rainbow, you're going to do a upside down U, and then you have to kind of go on the straight seam, go over maybe like an inch, and then do another upside down U shape, or an N shape, I guess. And I might add one more in between there. And then I'm going to go straight along that seam to our next curvy section, which is actually going down. And we're going to do the same motion, but upside down, using that seam again to go to the right or left and kind of hide it. It's like stitching in the ditch. And because we have those two parallel wavy lines across the whole quilt, we can continue this across the whole quilt. If you don't have horizontal straight lines like I do to depict rows in the quilt, you can just use a ruler to help you keep those seams that you need to go right to left straight, or you can mark right to left lines to use as a guide. Day one is in the books, and I successfully quilted 2 quilt tops from my pile. The sparked quilt, that's a baby size, and I quilted with the free motion loops and flowers. And then this squirrel quilt, which I did a new free motion technique with the rainbow-esque curvy lines. I would love to hear if you've done something similar, or if you're going to try this out on your long arm or domestic. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you for day 2 later in the week.